Mr. Honorable Schreiber will be making... This is a maiden speech, honorable members.
Honorable Chair, it is indeed true that South Africa is in desperate need of a new vision. We need a vision for a future where all South Africans can achieve prosperity. What our country does not need, however, is the ideologically infused hallucination that we got from the ANC during the State of the Nation address and debate. No, what we need is a practical vision grounded in the year 2019 rather than in the year 1919. The DA is the only party that offers such a modernizing vision, including when it comes to drastically reforming the public service. We are the party for prosperity.
Honorable members.
And to create shared prosperity, our vision is to build a 21st century opportunity state that serves, empowers, and creates the freedom for citizens to reach for the stars. The opportunity state is one that judges every decision on the basis of whether it expands possibilities for citizens to prosper. It is where bureaucrats become public servants, where a dedicated core of professionals shun corruption in all its forms, where Home Affairs is never offline, and where all teachers are well-trained and dedicated. Unfortunately, with the exception of DA-led municipalities and the Western Cape, South Africa is a depressingly long way away from achieving this vision. Today, more citizens are trapped in poverty than ever in the history of our country. As always, the ANC's response to this, as we've heard here today, is to double down on more of the same. The budget before us today makes it clear that the government has no serious plan to fundamentally reform the public service. Fellow South Africans, our government is trapped in denial. Instead of weaning themselves off of their outdated ideological drug, the ANC is upping the dose and hoping to escape into a comforting hallucination populated by bullet trains and imaginary cities. Undeterred by engineering the collapse of the public health sector, they now want to nationalize private care. After plunging the country into recession, they now want to tell you where to invest your pension. Following the destruction of Eskom, they now want to sink another 230 billion rand of your money down to that bottomless pit. Despite the minister's earlier words, the ANC has in fact created a patronage state that does not empower citizens, but controls and steals from them. So, how do we get from our current patronage state to the DA's opportunity state? The first step, which can be taken immediately, is to dramatically cut frivolous expenditure on maintaining the luxury lifestyles of cabinet members. Now, I was introduced to a new concept today of an old new ministerial handbook, but I'd like to suggest that instead of coming up with new concepts, we cut that thing to the bone. In the midst of an economic crisis that saw the economy decline by 3.2% in the last quarter, the so-called old new ministerial handbook continues to spend millions of rands on luxuries. Dear taxpayer, did you know that under the old new handbook, you will be paying for the likes of former ministers like Des van Rooyen to fly business class around the country for the rest of their lives? Nearly 150,000 people lost their jobs as a consequence of Van Rooyen's 4 days as finance minister. While he is rewarded and jets around the country on taxpayer money, the thousands of families who had their lives ruined are struggling to put food on the table. This madness must come to an end now. The Western Cape, which introduced its own streamlined, not old new, but streamlined handbook in 2011, has consistently been rated as the best run government in South Africa. The Western Cape proves that none of these luxuries are required for ministers to do their jobs. This is why I have already called for the Department of Public Service and Administration, and as we heard here today, they will appear before the Parliamentary Committee to accept recommendations on how to dramatically cut the ministerial handbook. Public money is meant to create prosperity for the people, not to buy Porsches for politicians. Secondly, we must wipe cadre deployment from the face of the earth. It not only breeds mediocrity, but it also lies at the root of corruption. I'm glad that the Honourable Minister mentioned the Zondo Commission, because cadre deployment is the original state capture. And therefore, I will be writing to the Zondo Commission, requesting them to launch a dedicated investigation into the ANC's cadre deployment committee. To eradicate the practice once and for all, the DA will also be proposing a private members bill to amend the Public Service Commission Act. A key reason why we still have teachers who are not in class and police officers who do not protect is because the leaders of these institutions are appointed not on the basis of competence, but on the basis of being loyal ANC cadres. Our private members bill will take the power of appointments over directors general and all other senior government positions away from politicians and give it to the Public Service Commission. The bill will also take direct aim at corruption, which fuels the wheels of the ANC's patronage state. Over the years, the Public Service Commission has recommended countless recommendations which were roundly ignored because they don't have the power to enforce them. The amendment bill will consequently enhance the Public Service Commission to punish offenders by making it a criminal act to defy its recommendations. Parliament recently enacted similar powers for the Auditor General, and it's high time that the Public Service Commission got its own set of sharp teeth. Now, rather than catching the next bullet train to the Honourable President's cloud choo-choo land, the third step we need to take is to tackle the public sector debt crisis head-on by restructuring and privatizing where required. It's time to be honest about this. The job of a leader is not to cower in fear of public sentiment. Sometimes the job is to tell hard truths. This is one of those times. The hard truth is that South Africa's public sector, as it currently exists, is not sustainable. Currently, 5.83 Rand out of every 10 Rand that's paid in taxes goes to servicing public debt and paying wages for public servants. Last year, the government granted 30 billion Rand more in wage increases than what had been budgeted. This means that only 4.17 Rand out of every 10 Rand that we take in taxes is actually available to spend on the people. Despite all of this, during the debate on the State of the Nation, and as we heard here from the Minister today, the Honourable Pravin Gordhan and the Minister tried to pretend that South Africa is not in some kind of crisis. The Honourable Pravin Gordhan desperately tried to convince us that our public sector was not bloated and inefficient. And this on the very same day that Denel, PRASA, and a lot of municipalities had to beg lenders for money just to pay salaries. Restructuring must happen, and it must happen in a responsible manner. We must aid workers with severance packages, jobs, placement, and reskilling. But while the Honourable Gordhan and his colleagues do not shy away from using the lives of thousands of workers as a political football, the question he failed to ask is, what about the impact on millions of citizens if we fail to restructure and privatize? What about the millions of South Africans who are already forced to pay exorbitant taxes and have less money left to build wealth and prosperity? Without fundamental reform, public servants will be jobless, the state will be bankrupt, and taxpayers will be left destitute. This is a hard truth, but the sooner we face it, the better. Honourable Chair, unlike the ANC, the DA is not escaping to the fantasy land of Ramakandla. We are not afraid to look citizens in the eye and acknowledge the socio-economic catastrophe in this country, and that we cannot keep on doing the same things that got us into the mess in the first place. Real leaders don't escape into dreams. Real leaders face up to reality. We need to implement the plan I outlined here today to curtail expenses on luxuries like the Ministerial Handbook, build a professional public service through ending cadre deployment and giving the Public Service Commission real power, and undertaking fundamental structural reform. This is the only way to ensure that patronage for some is replaced by prosperity for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member.